Hey everybody! Thanks for tuning into our read aloud this week. This story is called A Story for Bear, and it's by Dennis Haseley and Jim LaMarche. Before we get started, let's take a look at the front cover together. What do you notice about the front cover? I notice a bear, and I notice a woman, and it looks like she's reading to the bear. And I think that she's reading to the bear because I notice that the bear's head is kind of turned to the side like he's listening. If you have a dog or a cat at home, you might have seen them do this before, and it's when they're listening to the words that you're saying. So I'm thinking that this story might be something about a woman reading to a bear. Let's go ahead and get started and see if we're right. One day, a young bear was nosing through bushes when he saw something lying on the ground. He looked at it with curiosity. He sniffed at its tiny marks. Then the bear took it in his teeth and brought it back to his cave. Through the years, the bear looked at the paper with wonder. It seemed as far away and mysterious as the moon. I remember when I was learning to read, sometimes the words seemed so hard and I just didn't think that I could do it. Have you ever felt like Bear? Like there was something that was impossible for you to figure out? Something that was hard for you that you felt like you just couldn't do? Turn and talk to someone around you, or you can talk to yourself and tell them about that time. How did you feel? What was that experience like? One summer afternoon, the bear ranged farther than usual from where he lived. He followed a scent until he came to a clearing, and there he saw several strange things all at once. There was a cabin and brightly colored laundry hanging on a line, and a woman. From behind a thick tree, he watched as the woman sat down and opened a mysterious square thing she was carrying. His nose tickled from the wonderful smells of the cabin, bacon and coffee and bread, but he gazed only at her, trying to understand what she was doing as she held the book. He felt calm as he watched her. When she closed the book, he ran away. Day after day he returned. He managed to get closer to her and watched from behind a near tree, his thick bare head just peeking around. He had never seen anything like this. Sometimes, as she gazed at the book, she laughed out loud. Other times, she lowered it and looked away, but without really seeing anything, he thought. Still, other times, she appeared afraid and held it tightly. And once, when the sun slanted through the trees, he saw her place it gently on her lap and close her eyes. Later, she went into her cabin, and he lumbered slowly through the woods back to his cave. When he heard a blue jay call, he looked up quickly because he thought for a moment it was the woman laughing. One afternoon, the woman was not in her yard. Slowly, his head moving from side to side, he walked toward her things. With one big paw, he knocked a book off the pile to land face down in the dirt. He pushed it with his nose and scratched at its brown cover with his claws, trying to turn it over. Finally, one of his claws caught under the cover, and the book flipped over, opened. The bear moved his nose forward. Then it closed again, and his head snapped back. Once more he tried, and this time it stayed open. He took 2 lumbering steps toward it and put his big head close. There on the page were row after row of marks, tiny marks, like those on the piece of paper in his cave. He stared at them, while his nose filled with the scents of the paper, glue, ink, and her touch. He didn't see the woman walking up behind him. When he finally heard her, his head swung around. For a moment, their eyes locked. The bear pawed once more at the book, then turned and ran away. The next day, he saw the woman sitting in her chair, the book with the brown cover on her lap. She was looking into the trees, searching for something. When she finally saw him, she smiled. "Come here! Come here, bear!" After a while, he moved out from the tree, and then slowly he took a few steps toward her, with his big head swaying from side to side. When he grew near to her, but not so near that he couldn't run, he lay down and looked up at her. She waited a moment longer. Then she carefully opened the book, and softly she began to speak. "There once was a sailor," she read, "who had to travel for many years over the sea before he could return home." The bear gazed up at her as she read the words and turned the pages. He couldn't understand any of what she was saying, but as he listened to the sound of her voice, happiness washed over him like waves. He returned day after day, all that summer. When she read it in a fearful voice about the sailor getting lost, he felt afraid. When she laughed at how the sailor played tricks, the bear would feel strangely happy. When she read of his love, the bear looked up at the woman with wide eyes and watched as her gentle mouth formed the words. All the words she read made a story for Bear. Whenever she read, he felt the waves of mysterious feelings carried by her voice. Sometimes her voice was soothing and the bear grew peaceful, and sometimes she sounded excited or scared, and his hair bristled and he gave a low growl. And sometimes her sounds were tender, and he looked up at her and watched her fingers gently lifting a page and a page and a page. These feelings often stayed inside of him as he lumbered back to his world at the end of the day. And sometimes, in the babbling of a brook, he would think he heard her again and become quite happy. Bear isn't learning to read, but he loves hearing these stories that she's reading to him. After he hears these stories, he wanders home and he feels those emotions that the woman's voice was giving to him, and he continues to think about her. My mom used to always sing to me while she cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings, and now when I make my own breakfast on Sunday mornings, I can hear her singing in my head, and sometimes I often start singing too. This kind of reminds me of the bear's relationship with the woman. Can you think of an event or a time that reminds you of another person in your life, or something that they said or did that's special to you? Describe that to the person near you or think about it in your head. Who is that person and what did they do and how did it make you feel special? One afternoon, when he returned to the cabin, there was a chill in the air. She put down her book, looked at the bear, and said, I wish you could read these books when I'm away for the winter." Then she smiled at him, and the bear, seeing her smile, felt lightness in his heart, and she began to read aloud again. When next he came, he was carrying something in his mouth. It was the scrap of paper from his cave, with its mysterious marks. He laid it by her books. "Bear," she said. He knew by now that this was her word for him, and he lifted his head. "Bear, did you bring this for me?" And then she read it in her gentle voice, as if it were a story he was giving to her. "Dear Eliza, Your father and I have been cheered by your letter. We picture you often, living near the woods where we summered. I remember days of berry picking and golden light shining through tall trees. When the bear next returned, the leaves were changing color. When he reached the cabin, he saw what had changed there as well. She was not in her usual place, waiting for him. The bear walked into her yard, taking a few steps and moving his big head from side to side. He walked this way, up to where her chair had been. There, under the tree where she usually sat, were her books. There were many of them, more than he had ever seen, lying on a cloth, fallen leaves and pine cones on their covers. She had left them for him, along with a piece of paper, as if she had wished he could read it. For my bear. He looked at what she had left him, with his big head close. He understood that she was gone, as silence surrounded him. How do you think the bear is feeling right now? Then, tenderly as he could, he put his teeth around the book with the brown cover and carried it away. All that afternoon he made the long journey from his winter cave to her yard and back again through the forest, carrying her books with their covers of green and red and black, their words of sailors and goddesses and far-off lands, while the stream whispered and the blue jays called. That night, as the moon rose like a white page with mysterious marks, he lay among the hard covers of her books. Finally, he slept, and while he slept, he heard her voice, gentle and near. She was telling him a tale of adventure and magic and love. And all that winter, before she came back in the spring, whenever he put his nose to the pages or touched the covers with his claws, she was there. That makes me feel happy knowing that the bear was still connected to his new friend, even when she was away. Reading to him. That's the end of our read aloud today. I hope you guys enjoyed A Story for Bear. I want you guys to think, before I let you go, how would you feel if you were the bear at the beginning of the story? Now, think to yourself, how do you think the bear's feelings changed towards the end of the story? I like to think that at the beginning of the story, Bear was kind of confused. He didn't know how to read, and he didn't know what books were. But in the middle of the story, he met a stranger that became a friend. As he got to know this friend, his feelings changed, and he began to love books and love hearing the stories. Now, at the end of the story, Bear still was not able to read, but he had this very strong love for reading and this very strong love for books. I think it's important to notice that even though Bear could not read, he still loved books and still loved trying to learn to read. It's okay if we're not great at something, but if we learn to love it and learn to give it our best, it can only help us. And I love that Bear did that in this story.